Hey, this is Ramon, channel is Alpha 4. I know some of you have said you're not a fan of this mic, but it's the only one I got right now, and otherwise you wouldn't be able to hear me at all. So I'll try to turn up the sound. Hopefully it doesn't ruin the audio. So today I want to talk about Binding of Isaac. And I plan to compare it at the end with the sacrifice of Iphigenia. So let's begin. Sometime afterward, God put Abraham to the test and said, Abraham. Now it's important to note that test here doesn't necessarily mean test. In the Hebrew, it means more like purifying or showing the quality of. Then God said, take your son Isaac, your only one, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. Now there's something to be said here as well. It says Isaac, your only one, the one whom you love. Abraham had another son, Ishmael, who was his favorite son, who he banished on God's order in the chapter beforehand. And that's actually important to the story, as we're going to see in a little bit, especially with Jewish interpretation. As for the land of Moriah, that's going to be Jerusalem. Anyway, here we go. There offer him up as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. Early the next morning, Abraham saddled his donkey, took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac, and after cutting the wood for the burnt offering, set out for the place of which God told him. Now, in the Talmud, there is a Jewish addition to the story, which has a very long conversation with Abraham, and Abraham waking up in the morning and kissing his wife, and there's a conversation that happens. And it also names the 2 servants. The servants here are going to be Ishmael and his personal servant. And the personal servant represents Christianity, and Ishmael represents Islam in the Jewish interpretation in the Talmud, or at least in the Jewish explanation from their oral tradition. Continuing on. On the 3rd day, Abraham caught sight of the place from a distance. Now notice the skip here. So in other interpretations, such as the Talmud, there's a little conversation, there's more information in between. And also in other versions and in other interpretations, there's different ways to imagine what happened in those 3 days. And Kierkegaard spends a lot of time on those 3 days of silence and tries to fill it in with his anxiety and his interpretation of faith. Abraham said to his servants, stay here with the donkey, while the boy and I go on over there. Now notice that he has his servants stay with the donkey. For Jewish interpretations, that is very important. It's saying that the servants are not as developed mentally as his chosen son, as Isaac. Isaac is pure. This is showing that Isaac is pure and unblemished, that he is chosen. So Abraham stay here with the donkey, while the boy and I go on over there. We will worship and then come back to you. So Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac, while he carried the fire and the knife. Now this is called typology. So in typology, what you're doing is you're looking back and looking for inferences and analogies, analogs. So here, for Christians, we see a typology of Jesus, a typology of the crucifixion. A father, an only son, a sacrifice, a carrying of wood on the back, a clean, unblemished sacrifice, a chosen sacrifice. Continuing on. As the two walked together, Isaac spoke to his father, Abraham. Now that's important there. As the two walked together. That implies not together in a simple like, oh, they both walked, but it implies that they were of one mind and one purpose. Together in purpose. Also, Isaac is not a child here. In most Jewish understandings, he would be about 37 years old. And in the story itself, there's a big time gap from the time of Ishmael and Ishmael's exile. In the birth of Isaac, much time has passed here. So Isaac would more than likely be in his 30s, not a small child. So he is well aware of what's going on, and he's given his consent the entire time. All right, continuing. Father, he said. Here I am, he replied. Notice the respond there. Here I am. That's very similar to what God says. And it's an acceptance of his responsibility and his duty, something that Adam could not do in the garden. So one was hiding, one was saying, here I am. So he's saying, here I am. He's taken the initiative. He's taken responsibility for his choices, for his actions, for what he's about to do. Isaac continued, here are the fire and the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? My son, Abraham answered, God will provide the sheep for the burnt offering. Then the two walked on together. Again, unity of purpose. And if this child is 37 years old, then he's well aware of the implications that he is signing on to. And yet he's continuing to walk forward with his father in the same singular purpose. And more than that, you have this sort of prophetic exclamation of faith, what Kierkegaard in the character of John Silencio says is an absurdity. It's the absurdity of faith. It's God will provide. It's going to have to be Isaac because there's no other sacrifice. And yet, Abraham is saying God will provide a sacrifice. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. Next, he bound his son Isaac and put him on top of the wood of the altar. Then Abraham reached out and took the knife to slaughter his son. So he was intending to do it. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Here I am, he answered. Do not lay your hand on the boy, said the angel. Do not do the least thing to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you did not withhold from me your son, your only son. Now, there's a lot going on here, so let's go back just a little bit. The angel of the Lord. So, for some people, that would be the Metatron. For other people, it's going to be Saint Michael. But there is a way to read this where the angel of the Lord is Jesus himself saying, wait, a better, more true sacrifice is coming, namely himself. A purer sacrifice. One that will not just redeem Abraham, but will redeem the world. And this is where some Christians, many Christians in fact, read in the idea of the halting of child sacrifice, because no sacrifice is going to be good enough. This is going to be, hey, don't kill, don't do human sacrifice anymore. And while scholars and some theologians might disagree with that interpretation, it is an interpretation that Christians have come to again and again for millennia. Abraham looked up and saw a single ram caught by its horns in the thicket. So Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering in place of his son. Abraham named the place Hashem Yereh. Hence people today say, on the mountain the Lord will provide. The Lord will provide. The Lord will provide is the name of the mountain. The Lord will provide. And this mountain, this place of sacrifice, is where the Dome of the Mount is. This is where Jerusalem is. This is supposed to be where Jesus is crucified. This is supposed to be where Isaac is sacrificed. This is supposed to be where the dream, Jacob's ladder, is supposed to have happened. This is that place. This is the place that keeps on returning to the story, and the name changes, but the place remains. It's a very important place. A second time the angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven and said, I swear by my very self, oracle of the Lord, that because you acted as you did in not withholding your son from me, your only one, I will bless you and make your descendants as countless as the stars of the sky and the sands of the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the gates of their enemies, and in your descendants all the nations of the earth will find blessing because you obeyed my command. Those descendants are us. What makes this story so powerful, because we know that Isaac isn't sacrificed, but yet he was. And what Abraham was willing to sacrifice was us, you and I, the descendants of Abraham. Our father in faith was willing to sacrifice us. That's why this story hits so hard and it's so powerful. Though he was willing to sacrifice him, he didn't. While there is also a theme of resurrection, for some Jewish rabbis, when they read this, Isaac was sacrificed and then resurrected. And that's important because that theme will carry on and it'll show up again in Christianity. When I read the version of Iphigenia, it'll be the opposite. So in the story that I read, it will be that the child was replaced with a deer. But in actuality, if you read all the myths, she was killed. Well, in this one, the child would have been killed, but wasn't. Abraham then returned to his servants, and they set out together for Beersheba, where Abraham lived. And Abraham lived because his descendants continued on. His descendants lived. His future lived. We lived. Our future lives. There's also something to be said about the stars in the sky and the sands in the seashore. This is talking about the ups and downs of the Jewish people. When they are the stars of the sky, their hopes are great. Their futures are, their presents are great. When they're the sands of the seashore, they're being trampled on by other cultures and other tyrants and other types of groups and nations. So there's a lot going on here. Too much to get into in this conversation, but it's still beautiful. All right, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to come back and I'm going to read you the Iphigenia. So now let's give a quick version of the sacrifice of Iphigenia. Now, what I'm about to read is not the original ending, though I'm going to pull some parts from the original ending. The ending as we have it today, in the current version of the play, was probably an interpolation added on by a Christian author later in, who was trying to do some typology in this Greek myth, which was a mistake. But he did it anyway, and he changed the way the play ends. So the way the play ends today, it's not how it originally ended. And all the plays of that time period, all the myths of that time period agree that Iphigenia was sacrificed. Here in this version, it's going to look a little different, but that's okay. For the purposes of this, the contrast is going to help with the conversation we're having. So, Agamemnon brought Iphigenia to the island under the guise, under the falsehood that she was going to marry Achilles. Achilles finds out and decides he does want to marry her after all. And at this point, he's fighting for her life. He's asking her not to go with her father because they've all kind of figured out the game. And Iphigenia replies with this: I speak these words, no others, with due foresight. Enough is the daughter of Tandarus to have caused contents and slaughter of men through her person. But do not, though, O stranger, die in my behalf, nor slay anyone, but let me preserve Greece if I am able. He then whines and leaves. Then her mother shows up and her mother starts crying. She says for her mother to take care of her brother. Her mother asks, what is death? And the daughter replies back, the altar of the goddess, daughter of Zeus, will be my memorial. As prospering like the benefactress of Greece. What Clytemnestra does, remember, she's going to kill her husband for this act against her daughter. What she does here is she says, well, what do I tell your sisters? And Iphigenia says, don't clothe them in black garments. Don't have them mourn for me. But bid them farewell and train Orestes to be a man. She says, be persuaded by me, mother. Remain, for this is more fitting, both for me and thee. But let someone of these my father's followers conduct me to the meadow where I may be sacrificed. And then she's sacrificed. And so this is the scene that I'm going to read. Again, this was added on later. But here's how the version of her sacrifice reads currently, in the current version of the play. When King Agamemnon beheld the girl wending her way to the grove for slaughter, he groaned aloud, and turning back his head, he shed tears, placing his garment before his eyes. But she, standing near him that begot her, spoke thus: O Father, I am here for thee, and I willingly give my body on behalf of my country and of the whole land of Greece, that, leading it to the altar of the goddess, they may sacrifice it, since this is ordained. And as far as I am concerned, may ye be fortunate and obtain the gift of victory and reach your native land. Furthermore, let no one of the Greeks lay hands on me, for with a stout heart I will present my neck in silence. Thus much she spoke, and every one marveled on hearing the courage and valor of the virgin. But Talthybius, whose office this was, standing in the midst, proclaimed good omened and silenced the people. And the seer Clachus placed in a golden canister a sharp knife, which he had drawn out within its case, and crowned the head of the girl. But the son of Peleus ran around the altar of the goddess, taking the canister and the lustral waters at the same time, and he said, Beast slayer, daughter of Zeus, thy brilliant light by night, receive this offering which we bestow on thee, the army of the Greeks, the king Agamemnon, the pure blood from a virgin's neck, from a fair virgin's neck, and grant that the sail may be without injury to our ships, and that we may take the towers of Troy by the spear. But the Atreides and all the army stood looking on the ground, and the priest, taking the knife, prayed and viewed her neck, that he might find a place to strike, and no little pity entered my mind, and I stood with eyes cast down. But suddenly there was a marvel to behold, for everyone could clearly perceive the sound of the blow, but beheld not the virgin, where on earth she had vanished. But the priest exclaimed, and the whole army shouted, beholding an unexpected prodigy from someone of the gods, of which, though seen, they had scarcely belief. For a stag lay panting on the ground, of mighty size, to see the beauty and appearance with whose blood the altar of the goddess was abundantly wetted. And upon this Colothus thus spoke, O leaders of this common host of the Greeks, behold this victim which the goddess hath brought to her altar, a mounting, roaming stag. This she prefers greatly to the virgin, lest her altar should be denied with generous blood. And she hath willingly received this, and grants us a prosperous sail, and attack upon Troy. Upon this do every sailor take good courage, and go to his ships, since on this day it behooves us, quitting the hollow recesses of Aluis, to pass over the Aegean waves. For this day hath beheld the daughter dying and living in turn. Now, obviously that's not the original ending. In the original ending, she died. But in this version, this interpolation, she lived. And that's something to chew on. So why did some later author decide to change one of the greatest plays of all time to have a more Christian and Jewish outlook? Peace, like, and subscribe. Talk to you all later.